right, so this is breeding biology part 2. Now we're going to go from clutch size until young become somewhat independent from their parents. So clutch size is going to be affected by physiological constraints. How much energy a bird has available, one, to yolk up, vitellogenesis, or to raise their young. Altricial nestlings have increased energy demands, 40 to 50% above BMR to yolk up those clutches. Precocial clutches, so clutches with precocial birds actually require 125 to 180% energy above basal metabolic rate. So a lot more energy goes into precocial, the eggs of precocial chicks compared to altricial. With yolk production, again, vitellogenesis requires about 4.2 to 8.4 kilojoules per gram. And females have to consume about 5 kilojoules of food for each kilojoule put into the egg. So that's a lot of energy that these females have to get. When there's food limitation, then females either reduce their clutch size or they don't have reproduction. One of the things I put over here, again, with looking at life history traits, again, clutch size is one of the key life history traits that we might look at. Different species, again, these are more in Europe, but here's lifespan, how long individual birds live. And again, I think, even our song sparrow, based on banding records, these could be getting older by now. You can go to the Bird Banding Lab, U.S. Geological Survey Bird Banding Lab, and find out what the oldest known banded individual was. So that's another reason why we need bird banding, because if we don't individually mark these birds, we don't know how long they live. But small birds like a blue tit, 12 to 14 eggs in a clutch. These are cavity nesters. Song sparrows, usually somewhere between 4 and 6. European starlings, again, between 4 and 6, and it has body weight here. So, and then age at first reproduction as well. So some birds really take a lot longer to reproduce than others. And food resources, again, some birds can predict what the food resources are going to be. So snowy owls, for an example, when there's high vole populations early in the season, they seem to be the know if there's going to be lots of voles for them when their chicks hatch, so they will have higher clutch size than other years. There's also some suggestion that, we don't know whether this is cause or effect, but birds that are sometimes in lower quality habitat, whether it's the resources are less or predation is higher or predation risk is higher, they might have reduced clutch size. And this is something that I found in my study site. So this is, again, hooded warbler data. We're going to mainly look at, these are Tar Hollow, the black is the control site. So this is 80 to 100-year-old forest stand, and a stand that was the same age, but it had been thinned in the year 2000. So 10 and 11 years post-harvest, clutch size was lower in hooded warblers in the thinned stand or the harvested stand compared to the control stand. Now, clutch size, usually maximum clutch size around 5 eggs. So this is the average with all season long. So this is why this is lower. This is the average clutch size. But again, average clutch size was lower. But 12, 14, 15 years post-harvest, then we see no differences in clutch size. We also saw less difference in survival of these chicks with time too. So, potentially with time even, habitat quality can change and you can see variation in clutch size. Now, this could be because of habitat quality, maybe the resources weren't there and the birds didn't have as many eggs, or it could be individual quality, or a little of both. Okay, maybe individuals that nested in the thinned stand, maybe they weren't as high a quality. It's really hard to measure and tease those things apart, so I can say I don't know. Also, another thing when we're thinking about how birds get the energy, again, with life history, is that a species that is a capital breeder that depends on their energy reserves to yolk up their clutch, Or are they interest breeders where they use energy obtained on the breeding grounds? And again, this is hard to tease apart. This is where some studies on wintering grounds of neotropical migrants could be really helpful, because these birds, if they are higher mass and energy over the wintering period, and they fly back and immediately yoke up a clutch, those could be these capital breeders, actually using the energy reserves that they had been building up all winter long on a winter habitat. Versus if they're interest breedings, especially the second clutch, they're probably relying on the energy that's obtained on the breeding grounds. So again, understanding this better is going to help us with conservation of birds. So some other factors that affect clutch size could include age. This isn't always the case, but in some species we've seen clutch size differ based on age, and then also here we have first breeding attempt in these different species versus clutch size in later breeding attempts. So there could be some differences in age. There could be differences in geography. Usually breeding seasons are shorter as you move towards the poles, higher latitude. So you might have one clutch per season, but maybe more eggs in that clutch. Whereas if you live in our area, say, where you can have 2 clutches a year, then you may have fewer eggs in those. So here, one example, this is with white-crowned sparrows in the different subspecies of them. The Gambel's white-crowned lives at higher latitudes. Their clutch size tends to be larger than related white-crowned sparrows down at Puget Sound, and then even down along the coast in Oregon and California. Sometimes there's seasonal variation in clutch size. So early in the season, you might have a smaller clutch. This could be, again, because of the energy availability. It could also be because you're testing out the waters of the habitat. How high a predation is this? So for an example, sometimes a bird will lay a couple eggs in a nest, see if they get eaten. And if they don't get eaten, then they'll be like, okay, seems safe. I'm going to go ahead and lay a clutch. Or a larger clutch, or just go ahead and raise that brood, and if things go well, they'll have larger clutch size later. What we often see is, especially in birds that breed multiple times throughout the season, you might have lower clutch size at the very beginning of the season, a little bit higher clutch size early to mid, and then smaller clutch size later in the season. This could be, again, resource availability. I once had a female, she had 4 clutches. Her first clutch, I think she had 4 eggs, the next 3. Her very last clutch, she laid 1 egg really late in the season. Basically, every nest had been predated, so she kept losing these clutches. Finally, she got 1 egg. She did get that chick out, but again, it was really late in the season, so who knows if it survived or not, but 1 egg was all she had. This comes into clutch and egg replacement. So again, a lot of birds will relay a clutch or eggs depending if something happens to their earlier eggs. So this is where we have a difference between determinate and indeterminate layers. So determinate layers have a fixed clutch size and they cannot replace those eggs if they're taken. Indeterminate layers will lay replacement eggs or replacement clutches. So a lot of birds, like the passerines that I worked with, if you remove their eggs, sometimes they'll abandon the nest because that suggests that, hey, a predator, like a chipmunk, has been here and it's stealing my eggs. And if I keep my eggs in there, they're going to come back 1 a day until they're all gone. That's what chipmunks do. So a lot of times they'll just go ahead and abandon and then build a whole new clutch. Some birds, though, like chickens, condors, will lay a replacement egg. So that has been actually helpful in some species that are endangered. They've been able to take that first egg or 2 and then use those and raise them in an incubator and then allow the bird to naturally raise its own young as well. Okay, with incubation. So incubation is a relatively unique avian character. Where the bird actually provides the warmth so that the embryo can develop. Here we have just a pie chart that shows male-only incubation, no incubation, so that would be that megapode, the brush turkey. Doesn't incubate at all, but so male only. We have some female only, so most birds just do female only incubation. And again, about 50% of birds are shared incubation. So to incubate eggs, females will lose, or the males, if they incubate, will lose the feathers on their abdomen a little bit before they start to incubate. So maybe towards the end of egg laying, they'll lose those feathers. Their brood patch develops, it becomes highly vascularized, so it has a lot of fluid in there. This is an old brood patch. So this brood patch, when this female was actually sitting on eggs, would have been much more swollen and red, and that is to allow an efficient heat transfer to those eggs. And again, most eggs are incubated around 38 to 39 degrees Celsius. In some species like vireos, the male does help with incubation, but they usually don't develop as an extensive brood patch as a female does. We can also, as banders, we always look at the brood patch during the breeding season because that tells us the stage that they're in. So this female has some pin feathers starting to come onto her belly. So we can tell that she is done incubating her first clutch. We would rate this as a 4. 3 would be highly swollen. A 4 is, it's starting to be, that liquid is going to be reabsorbed. A bird can come back into breeding, like so if this female, although owls don't usually, but if they would have a second clutch, then that brood patch, those feathers would drop again, and then it would become more highly vascularized again. So again, most of the time incubation occurs to keep those eggs warm. And in most birds, from studies with chickens and maybe a warbler or two, we know that the absolute zero temperature or minimum temperature that eggs have to be kept at is about 26 degrees Celsius. Below 26 degrees Celsius, embryonic development slows or stops. So the embryo could die if it gets below 26 degrees. Some birds have to actually keep their eggs cool. So like in my hooded warblers, I've had nest temperature going up to 40, 41 degrees Celsius. About 104 degrees Fahrenheit, I've had the eggs die. So in one open habitat, I had the eggs get that warm and that clutch failed. So if the embryo gets too hot, they're not going to succeed. So some birds actually have to cool eggs by providing shade, or in this bird, this Egyptian plover, they're getting water on their feathers so that they can have evaporative cooling to help keep their egg cooler. When do birds start to incubate? Again, that depends. So asynchronous hatchers, they will start to incubate before their entire clutch is laid. That way, the oldest chick, when the first chick hatches, that chick can start to be fed and to grow. And if there's enough food left over for the siblings, then they'll also survive. So a lot of hawks and owls have asynchronous hatching, and it's kind of hedging the bet on, at least if I get my oldest one out, it will survive. If there's enough food, then I'll get the other ones out as well. And it also hedging your bet because maybe if that first chick is not as healthy, then your second chick might actually be able to survive. A lot of birds, though, will do synchronous incubation. So they'll lay an egg every day or every other day until they get their full clutch, and then they'll start to incubate. Now, incubation is energetically costly. The older literature and even the book had mentioned that, the birds kind of snooze while they're incubating. Well, that's not really true. So here, this older graph has the metabolic rate when they're out of the nest versus on the nest and the different times a day. So overall, especially in the morning, it's a little bit cooler, so your metabolic rate is higher. But overall, they're showing that metabolic rate on the nest was relatively stable. However, we do know now from other studies that incubation does require increased energy demand over resting metabolic rate, especially when temperatures are outside of the thermal neutral zone. So thermal neutral zone, if you're, you don't have to shiver to stay warm, you don't have to produce energy or use energy to stay warm, and you don't have to use energy to stay cool. We've talked about that in earlier lectures. So for an example, with a lot of our birds, like my hooded warbler, we think that their thermal neutral zone, the lower part of that, is around 20 degrees Celsius. Well, during a lot of our breeding period in May, those nighttime temperatures get below the thermal neutral zone. And so those birds are using increased energy to maintain these 38, 39 degrees Celsius temperatures for their eggs. Cost of incubation also depends on the duration. So again, thinking about when things are more challenging and how long birds have to stay on the nest before they can go and feed and refuel. So how long do birds incubate? Well, it could be, incubation periods could be as short as 11 or 12 days to as long as 90 days. Now, in general, incubation periods is correlated with egg size, but again, there's always exceptions to those rules. Incubation duration is also associated with altricial versus precocial young. So again, those precocial chicks take longer to develop. They have more yolk, they can stay in the egg longer, and then they hatch out feathered and ready to go a little bit compared to our altricial nestlings. And again, this is related to ecology and a lot of times the safety of the birds. So like with our precocial chicks, their eggs might be relatively safe while they're in the egg, but then they need to get up and get out of there. So the ecology is really an important predictor of how long incubation occurs. Nest attentiveness, what's the bird doing while she's on the nest? Again, the book indicated that they just kind of snooze. But really what I found with my hooded warblers is most of the time these birds are very alert. Eyes open, looking around, very alert, and knows what's going on in the environment. The duration of the on or off bout is going to be related to the female's energetic costs. The less energy a female has to expend, the more time she can spend on the nest. One of the things I have here, this is an eye button, a temperature trace from an eye button. This is temperature in degrees Celsius on the y-axis in time. So this is the trace for one female on one morning. And here you can see overnight she's maintaining her nest temperature, probably warmer earlier in the night, but on a cold night she's having to use more energy. That temperature dropped down to about 36 degrees Celsius instead of up here around 38, 39 where she'd prefer it to be. But she's maintaining an even first thing in the morning after she's depleting her energy reserves. She's still keeping that temperature between 36 and 37 degrees. We can see she becomes to get a little bit restless here around daylight, so 6 in the morning, and then we can see when she leaves the nest the first time, and then when she comes back on, that temperature quickly rises again. She really warms that up again, closer to 39 degrees Celsius. And then you can see this pattern of on and off bouts the rest of the day. So she has a shorter little on bout here in the morning. Again, she needs to go replenish those energy reserves, get off and feed again. And then she has a longer on bout, and again later on the day she might have longer on bouts. On really warm afternoons, sometimes the females will leave longer so that they can forage, or maybe the eggs don't need as much care. Now, this attentiveness is really important. Again, maintaining the temperature. There's a whole host of fitness costs to those nestlings if they're not maintained at a warmer temperature, and lots of studies. One example I have is just from my own data with hooded warblers. This is the mean hourly temperature and nests that were successful compared to those that failed. And again, remember that predation is the #1 cause of nest failure. So this is even, the nests were still warmer in those nests that actually fledged young compared to those that failed. Another example, again, using my hooded warblers, we talked about experience in these females. And we found that hooded warbler females that were older, this after second year compared to second year, so second year in their first breeding, after second year, their second breeding season or older, they had higher nest temperature first thing in the morning. So prior to their first off-bout, these older females had a higher nest temperature compared to the younger females, but there was no difference in the nestling period. We also see that with age and incubation, the amount of temperature drops. So as that female is off the nest for the first time in the morning, we looked at how much the temperature in the nest dropped. And again, because they were warmer, older females maintained a higher minimum nest temperature while they were away. Important caveat to note is that even these second year, these younger females, they were just below 28 degrees Celsius. And again, that critical temperature is 26 degrees Celsius. So below 26, they could lose their eggs. The embryos could die. All right, so back to other birds. Some birds do uninterrupted incubation bouts. So for emperor penguins, they spend all winter long. The males spend with that egg in the little pouch above their feet. Hornbills also, there's that wonderful picture in the book, always a good example of how that hornbill female seals herself in to the nest, and the male will bring food for her until her nestlings are about ready to fledge. Some birds will desert their nests during incubation. So if they don't have enough resources, they'll desert. With predation, again, adult mortality in birds is relatively low, but while a female is on a nest or male, they could be subject to predation. And this is where human researchers have to be really careful, because if you disturb a nest, especially early in egg laying or in incubation, the birds may leave. They may assess that nest as not being safe. One of the things we really had to watch was some females would not accept the eye buttons, and early incubation, they would either desert the nest or potentially damage their eggs. So we would often pull those eye buttons out until they had chicks. Then after that, they were so invested in that nest that they were more likely to tolerate our presence. So always be careful early incubation, especially on how much you disturb a nest. Okay, so nest microclimate, again, the females are spending a good bit of time there, and the females or the males, whoever's incubating, is going to have to spend more energy if the microclimate is less suitable. So microclimate can affect incubation by either accelerating or retarding development of the embryos. One example was with dark-eyed juncos in burned areas versus non-burned areas. They nest on the ground, and those exposed areas got colder at night, and so they had lower growth. Here is another study looking at growth rate of dark-eyed juncos with nest type, whether or not they were burrowed into the hill or they were exposed. And there's those burrow nests might have been maintaining a more stable environment, but cooler in general, and so they had lower growth rates in mass, wing, and tarsus length. Here, something I'm thinking about doing as a next project is looking at, this is with hooded warblers, the ambient temperature at the nests of my hooded warblers. So there was some suggestion that younger females had nests with colder, 1 degree Celsius colder ambient temperature compared to older females. So I started looking at topographic position. So this is the minimum temperature in a 24-hour period. Of course, cold air sinks, right? So the valleys in the morning are going to be usually cooler than the ridge tops. And here, this is what we're seeing overall, that the ridge top nest sites are warmer than the valley sites. And this is what we're seeing for older females' nests especially, and then younger females as well. So look for more to come later. Again, the microclimate is going to affect the bird's metabolic rate and affects how much time that the bird has to spend on the nest or how much time the bird has to go off and feed. And here, this is just a gratuitous cute picture. So right here is a worm-eating warbler on her nest. All right, so I've been talking about young, whether or not they're altricial or precocial. So now I'm going to actually come back and define that. So altricial, again, young are going to require substantial parental care for food, nest sanitation, and thermoregulation, while precocial young are well-feathered, mostly thermoregulate on their own, can usually locomote relatively shortly after hatching. With altricial young, their motor and sensory capabilities are not well developed. They have to spend time in the nest and even post-fledging developing the motor and sensory nervous system skills. And they are going to get pair throughout their nestling, fledgling, and even post-fledging parental care. With precocial, again, that yolk sac was larger in precocial birds, so that yolk sac can still provide about a third of the energy that can be used during the first couple of days, or first day at least, that the chick is out of the egg. So this is why if you order baby chicks from a dealer, they get shipped in the mail at hatching, and they don't need fed right away because they can still use up the energy left over in their yolk. And again, why do they do this? So a lot of times it's with the ecology. If you can move as soon as you hatch, you're getting away from that nest, might have picked up debris or smells or anything, just get out of that habitat, move to a safer habitat, and you can also move closer to food, whether or not the parents are feeding you or you can feed your own self. Now, one of the things to be careful about, we talk about altricial and precocial young as two different things. And really, it's better to think about it as a continuum of traits. So here we have altricial young that they don't have any down, their eyes are closed, they're not mobile, parents have to nourish them, and parents have to attend to them, okay? Now, with some owls, though, they do have down, so the young might be able to thermoregulate a bit, but they still need parental care for all of the other things. We get semi-altricial birds, so these are herons and hawks. They do have down, their eyes are usually open, but they are not very mobile, so they're going to stay in a nest. They're still going to require their parents to nourish them, and their parents are going to have to attend the nest a good bit. We go up here, then finally we can kind of keep going up in the precocial range of things. And here we see ducks and shorebirds. Again, they have down, their eyes are open, they're mobile at hatching. Parents don't really need to nourish them, but they still require their parents' attendance, especially for protection. In contrast, megapodes, again, don't provide, these brush turkeys, for example, don't provide any care for their young once they hatch and get out of that mound. So regardless of the development time, nestlings do grow really quickly. This is an example with hooded warblers. So this is typical of a lot of our passerines, warblers, smaller birds like that. They grow up really super fast. So on hatch day, they often have some down, but shortly after they lose that. So the pin feathers start to grow underneath the skin and push out that natal down. And then the nestlings look like this on day 0 to day 1 after hatching. And this, again, losing those feathers allows for more efficient heat transfer from the parent to the offspring. Day 3, they're still naked for the most part. They're starting to get some of these fuzzy little pins here. You can start to see some of these pin feathers developing underneath the skin of the limbs. But their eyes are still closed. Day 4, look what happened already. Just in one day, those pin feathers start to break out through the skin now, but their eyes are still closed. And hooded warblers, they usually open their eyes on day 5, and their pin feathers start to break at the very end. So the sheaths start to fall away at the very end on day 5. Day 6 and 7, the nestlings are more feathered, but they're still mostly in pin. They still can't fly. But they could potentially fledge on day 7. Usually they need to make it to day 8, though, for them to survive. So these birds might only stay in the nest for 8 to 12 days. So what can parents do while they're trying to raise these young? So, one of the things we've been talking all along is with crypsis. They try to conceal their nest, they try to conceal their eggs and their nest site. Again, I already brought up nest predation rate, higher in open nesters. And here again, this is just looking at predation risk and how much parental activity is at the nest. So whole nesting birds can provide more trips per hour compared to open nesting birds. Also, predation is higher in the tropics compared to the temperate climates. So less parental visits in the tropics as well because of predation risk. So predation drives a lot of things. And why predation is such a huge driver of nesting and behavior is because, if you think about these, these hooded warblers, they're a little packaged bundle. They're like chicken nuggets. They're nutritious little bundle of protein and fat. And almost everything needs some protein and fat, including deer. So these are examples of some of the predators that we have here in Ohio that eat nestlings. So deer will eat nestling birds. They will also eat the adults if they can get them. I was at a banding site in Pennsylvania where the deer were actually eating the birds out of the nets that they were capturing the birds in. So we do know that we've lost some nestlings to deer predation. Raccoons and possum, of course. Chipmunks are little voracious predators. They will come and take one egg or one nestling per day until the nest is gone. Corvids, blue jays and crows, will look for and eat eggs. I actually had a red-headed woodpecker eat my baby hoodeds one time. That was a mess. Of course, snakes. And in a lot of places we have these feral hogs, which are causing a lot of damage to the understory, the vegetation and land, just like deer do. But they also will eat eggs and adult birds that are on the ground or in shrubs. So what do parents do? All right, so in addition to kind of hiding their nests, birds can be aggressive. Sometimes these aggressive displays are effective and sometimes they're not. Down here we have a picture of a sun bittern with these eye spots that must look scary to some predators. Birds might do distraction displays, so you may have seen a killdeer do this broken wing display. I've also seen ovenbirds in my forest do this as well. Birds participate in nest sanitation, so most, especially altricial young, produce these fecal sacs that the parents will then remove so that the nest stays tidy. Sometimes the barons actually eat these fecal sacs, and the book talks about it a little bit. So especially when the nestlings are young, altricial young aren't very good at getting the nutrients out of the food, so there might be more nutrients packed into these fecal sacs, and the parents may be able to extract some of the energy back from them. Otherwise, they take them off and they drop them off somewhere in the woods. Some birds then can actually move their young. So the book talked about a couple different species of birds that can put their young either on their backs or carry them off somehow. So these birds are not old enough to locomote on their own, but they were able to crawl up on mom or dad's back and go to safety. Okay, here I'm going to show you some videos from my own work on research. This first one is just showing you a nest with 7-day-old chicks. So there's only 2 chicks in this nest, and they're pretty active and healthy looking for 7-day-old chicks. This mom, I was watching her a couple hours later up on the ridge as she was foraging when all of a sudden the male called and the female flew back immediately. Of course, I also ran back and then dove into the bush, the green briars, and replaced the battery to get this next video. So here I found a black rat snake eating my white aluminum white banded nestling. 7-day-old nestling is gone or is being eaten. Now I don't have it in this video, but there is the other nestling actually got away. So the parents weren't able to help this chick out, but they were able to get the other chick out of the nest because it was 7 days old, and got it away from the snake. So at least it lived that day. Here we have a video. See if you can tell what comes here. Dad's trying to defend the nest ineffectively. There it is. There's the muncher, the chipmunk. So here the female is sitting on the nest. Chipmunk starts to climb up. The female calls in the male. Both male and female try to chip and chase off the chipmunk, but the chipmunk doesn't care and takes one nestling. This nest did end up failing. The chipmunk came back once a day until all the nestlings were gone. So when altricial young fledge, their motor skills are not well developed. They still cannot fly. Their wings are not fully grown in yet. They're getting there, but they're still not developed enough to fly. And here you can actually see some young. These are 10 to 12 day old chicks, I think closer to 12. The parents are chipping, so you can hear that in the background. Basically, the parents have decided this is fledge day. They're the windows. The parents refuse to bring food into the nest. They're chipping out in the shrub layer, trying to entice those chicks to come out to be fed. This one seems to be very enjoying the extra space. So it started raining, and this chick decided maybe to go with me. But again, the parents continue to chip outside away from the nest. They're not putting food in until they come out. They did all fledging on that day. Alright, so post-fledging, parents still provide care for the young. So this is a re-nest or a second brood. The female just left the nest. These chicks are about 2 or 3 days old, and dad is coming in and feeding this nest full of new nestlings. What you hear in the background is an obnoxious teenager still baking. So usually the young, there she is. So this is about a month-old chick that's been out of the nest. Not quite a month. It can fly now. It's not super efficient. It's starting to forage a little bit on its own, but it's still begging from dad. This is rather unusual. Usually parents don't allow these obnoxious young to come back to the nest. So usually the male takes them and keeps them away. This dad must have been a pushover because the kid wasn't listening. So we see this in a lot of species, that the female will help feed the fledged young until she gets her clutch yoked up, her clutch built, and then when she starts incubating, the dad, or the male, keeps those young away. I've seen it in scarlet tanagers and hooded warblers, that kind of thing. But this was the first nest that we actually saw a young come back to. So what about precocial chicks then? So precocial chicks, some leave the nest directly after hatching, some stay in the nest for a little bit longer. So the murrelets, guillemots, etc. end up developing at sea. So they can't fly yet, but they can swim. So they go off and follow their adult, and then this allows the adult to take them closer to a food supply so that they can feed the chicks there and help to provide some protection. Other chicks can walk away shortly after, and they can start feeding as well. So this is another example from your book with the lesser Rhea. Flamingos, they do stay in the nest for a little bit. These flamingos in these salt plains, basically, after some rains, they come and they breed. If you haven't watched Our Planet yet, I think this is in the second episode, first or second, anyways, it will make you cry. At least it did me. But basically they filled these platform nests, but they raise their young and then the water starts to dry up and they have to get their chicks out to get water. So the adults get all the young and they all walk off for water, and some of them just are too young and too weak to make it, and that salt builds up, and well, spoiler alert, it doesn't do so well. So anyways, it's worth watching. It's extremely worth watching. Everybody should be watching Our Planet. Make your parents watch it, especially the people that don't believe in climate change. But anyways, what we're doing. And plus David Attenborough is amazing. So with parental care, we'll get back to topic, parental care. Again, there's a range of parental care provided to these precocial chicks, from none and the brush turkeys, megapodes, to just protection and feeding, kind of like that figure in the graph that I showed you earlier. All right, last slide. I'll leave you with this, and I'm sure your parents have probably made mistakes, hopefully not severe ones, but I thought I'd share with you. This is a just fledged young. He hasn't gotten out very far from the nest. You can see him, about 12-day-old chick here, and Dad's going to come and try to feed him. Oops. this week. Take care. Bye.